A donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, P.O. Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that we need to be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one's going to get cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is political commentator and columnist Patrick O'Flynn, and here's what we're going to be discussing. Bills, bills, bills. They're all set to soar with the dual pain of skyrocketing energy costs and inflation. April the 1st marks the beginning of financial pain for many, and it's sadly no April Fools. We'll focus on the mounting cost of living crisis. As our gas prices escalate, Putin tries to make European countries pay in rubles for his fuel by opening Russian bank accounts. They now have weeks to figure out what to do or face energy rationing. And as petrol prices inflict pain at the pump on many, environmental activists have chosen to blockade oil terminals as the government grapples with net zero targets during a mounting energy crisis. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next hour, and I want to know your views, so do get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. It comes ahead of the increase to national insurance later this month. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to do much more.
The government response has been utterly pathetic. No real response to that, no comfort to people who are so worried. What we, the Labour Party, have said is, look, the oil and gas companies in the North Sea have made excess profits over and above what they expected because of the high level of pricing across the world. That windfall tax should be used to take up to £600 off people's bills. And that is a practical solution to a very, very real problem.
Specialist police officers have started to remove environmental activists blocking oil terminals across England. The group Just Stop Oil says around 10 sites have been obstructed by hundreds of protesters. It's calling on the government to stop funding new oil licences. Among those taken away by officers were 2 people who'd climbed on top of a tanker at an Esso depot in Birmingham. At least 13 arrests have been made so far. Several facilities have been forced to suspend operations as a result of the blockades. One protester spoke to GB News reporter Amelia Harper earlier. She says urgent action is needed.
We need to just stop oil, and if that's wind turbines, then I think that's a much, much smaller price to pay than the end of civilization as we know it, and I'm not exaggerating. We need to stop oil now, or our children will have no future.
To Ukraine, the mayor of Kyiv says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city. Vitaly Klitschko is also warning those wishing to return to the capital to wait. It comes as the UK's Ministry of Defence claims Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian forces have been forced to change their tactics.
To the north of Kyiv, in the direction of Chernihiv, in the Sumy region, the occupiers are being pushed back. They are aware that they can no longer stand the intensity of hostilities they could have held in the first half of March. But we must also understand that for the Russian military, this is part of their tactics. All this is not that easy. We know their plans. We know that they are moving away from the areas where we are beating them to focus on others that are very important, on those where it can be difficult for us.
The Red Cross is sending teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow's agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Earlier, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said some progress had been made at peace talks. President Zelensky's office confirmed further negotiations are continuing today. Refugees fleeing Mariupol have described the devastation they've witnessed.
I was in Mariupol the whole time. We just slowly watched how the number of our homes was getting smaller every day. Everyone I know, they don't have a house right now. I also don't have a house. And all the belongings that I have with me, that's all I took out.
We waited for the negotiations so much, for 2 or 3 days. But when we realised on March 22nd that we had food left for 2 days, and we were drinking water only by 2 gulps, we decided to leave. But we were leaving under shelling. It was scary.
Meanwhile, a Russian governor has accused Ukraine of attacking a fuel storage facility in the Russian city of Belgorod overnight. The official claims 2 military helicopters struck after crossing the border. Some areas of the city were evacuated. Ukraine's defense ministry has declined to comment, and the claim hasn't yet been independently verified. In other news, the government insists it will ban gay or bisexual conversion therapy, but not transgender. It comes just hours after the Prime Minister had said he'd drop the ban entirely. Boris Johnson's said to have changed his mind after seeing the furious reaction to his original decision. The backlash followed the announcement that ministers were looking instead at ways of preventing conversion therapy through existing law. And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today. That as another record number of people in the UK have had COVID. At the end of last week, an estimated 4.9 million people had it, up from 4.3 million the week before. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. Those considered to be high risk and some NHS and social care staff will still be eligible for free tests. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alex and we need to talk about.
You know, I don't want to hear it. Pompous know-it-alls making out like the cost of living crisis means cutting back on luxuries. First of all, if you've worked all day, in my book, that means you deserve to be able to eat something other than a toast sandwich. Secondly, you didn't cause the gas prices to rocket through short-sighted energy policy, nor did you invade Ukraine, bail out banks while signing off on bonuses, close down businesses for 2 years due to a nasty cold, or make the call that having wasted billions on failed vanity projects like HS2, decide the country is now so broke we need to take hard-earned cash off those toiling to feed their families to balance the books. And so April Cruel Day is not of your making, and it's in the gift of the government to do something about it. When people are having to queue at food banks, shiver under 5 blankets and move in with mum and dad aged 40, then government priorities have gone horribly wrong. Remember pandemic policy to cut stamp duty? Well, it helped a load of homeowners buy bigger houses, lining the pockets of donor developers while ensuring only oligarchs can hide their dirty cash in city properties. But they won't build enough housing stock because, of course, that will upset NIMBYs at the branch barbecue in the burbs. Here we are, in Brexit Blighty, with all the freedoms left behind Britain trusted the Tories to use to boost their standard of living. Their voices finally heard after decades of neglect. But I struggle to see a single policy that puts Workington man first. Lady T would be turning in her grave as our nation of greengrocers is taken to the cleaners. So from today, the cost of living crisis is deepening for many households. Energy bills will skyrocket and a raft of tax rises are coming into force. And the government's proposed national insurance tax rise will come into force next Wednesday. For the first of our Beat the Squeeze special reports, here's GB News business and economics editor, the one and only Liam Halligan.
We're heading for the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, and Rishi Sunak's spring statement measures will do little to offset that drop. This cost of living squeeze has been months in the making. As we emerge from lockdown, global supply chains remained broken. Demand has surged, but our economies struggled to get into gear, causing prices to rise. Even before Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine, UK inflation was at a 30-year high. Now this conflict's stopping Russian and Ukrainian crops and energy exports reaching global markets, again causing prices to spiral. From today, April the 1st, household utility bills go up by 54% on average to almost £2,000 a year, with bills set to rise even further in the autumn. Also from today, council tax bills rise by 3% on average, although those in bands A to D are in line for a £150 rebate. From next week, national insurance contributions increase by 1.25 percentage points for employers and employees. That will cost basic rate taxpayers an extra £178 a year on average, while those on higher rate tax will pay, again on average, £715 more. As these higher bills and tax rises take hold, wheat, barley and fertiliser prices are also soaring, pushing up food and drink prices in the shops, restaurants and pubs. Petrol and diesel costs are also on the up, of course. It's now almost £100 to fill up a family car. And Sunak's spring statement fuel duty cut has been only partly passed on by retailers, with pump prices still rising. GB News has been highlighting inflation and the rising cost of living for months. But today's a day when the cost of living squeeze got significantly tighter.
Yeah, didn't it just? Well, joining me now on the show is the inimitable head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowdon. Christopher, I mean, are we partly potentially to blame as consumers because we've become very throwaway and we're very consumerist in the 21st century? Is it time to make do and mend, or should the government be doing more?
I don't think people are going to have much choice other than to make do and mend. There isn't really a great deal that the government could do. You can certainly quibble about its recent policies in the spring statement. I'm not sure it was necessary to freeze benefits while increasing pensions by over 7%, for example. But the government doesn't have any money. It's £2.3 trillion in debt. This is not something that it can fix at this stage, partly because it's a global problem. It's partly a result of natural disasters, if you like, and of course the war in Ukraine hasn't helped, but all this preceded the war in Ukraine. You can't use that as an excuse. The reality is that this is in large part, the culmination of many years and several successive governments' failure to get a grip on this. And so, although it can't do anything about the price of fertilizer, for example, which is largely at the root of a lot of these problems in actual fact, it could have done something about the cost of childcare, could have done something about the cost of housing. Housing is a much bigger part of people's expenditure than food is these days. It could have done a lot in all sorts of areas, but it really hasn't cared. It's had other priorities. That's the bottom line. I'll give you one example. Fairly small example, but in October, the government plans to ban buy one, get one free deals in supermarkets. When the government first looked at this idea about 7 years ago, it noted that just after the financial crisis, when there was a spike in inflation, people used these kind of deals as a way to cut the cost of living. But by 2015, this wasn't seen as a problem anymore because it was just assumed that inflation would be low. In fact, the whole house of cards that is the British economy over the last nearly 15 years now has been based on the idea that inflation wouldn't go up much above 2%. And the whole system of borrowing endless amounts of money and printing endless amounts of money relied on it not going to the kind of levels that we've got now. And now that now it's happened for various different reasons, and there isn't a solution. It's not going to be all right this time.
I mean, this is supposed to be the government of levelling up, the government who voted in off the back of working classes, who put their faith in the Conservatives to perhaps use Brexit dividends to help boost their lifestyles and their standards of livings. Do you see the wealth gap getting even bigger?
Inequality actually fell a little bit in the first year of the pandemic. There's no reason to assume just because you're in economic hard times, you'll see a fall in income inequality. Quite the reverse, in fact. Generally speaking, recessions are associated with a drop in inequality, which is one reason why inequality actually isn't a very good way of measuring the strength of an economy. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. The most important thing has always been material standards of living. They are undoubtedly going to drop. There's nothing the government can do about it. So, yeah, inequality is not, I don't think, should ever be the main measure, or even one of the main measures in measuring the economy. It's all about the cost of living. I will say something slightly more optimistic to people who are saying that this is a return to the 1970s. We are much, much richer than we were in the 1970s. The unions aren't as strong, so we're not going to see the kind of industrial action that was such a big problem in those days. But we have got an energy crisis like the 1970s. We have got a Cold War like in the 1970s. And although we haven't quite got inflation up to the level of 25%, which it was in 1976, the year I was born, we've got inflation at a 40-year high. It's going to get higher. There's a possibility of a wage price spiral. But as I say, we are more than twice as rich as we were in the 1970s. And that means that we're not going to be anywhere near the levels of real misery that we did in that decade. But it drives home the most important point I'd like to make, which is we need economic growth. Not only has the government failed to address the cost of living over the last 10, 20 years, it's certainly since 2008, it's failed to generate economic growth. We know how to generate economic growth. You need sensible but minimal regulation, particularly in areas like the labour market, and you need low taxes. We've got neither. We've got a highly over-regulated economy that Brexit has certainly done nothing to change. We have high taxes and we have very low growth. We could ride these kind of problems out if we had the kind of growth that you see in various other countries and that we've seen in the past.
Christopher, thank you ever so much. Christopher Snowdon there from the IEA, giving us his sage insights into the economy. The dramatic increase in the cost of living comes on the same day that MP salaries rise to just over £84,000. Ouch. Their pay is increasing by 2.7% after the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority gave the go-ahead for the first time in 2 years. Let's cross live to Westminster and GB News reporter Paul Hawkins, who's following this story. Paul, the timing is uncomfortable, to say the least.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Alex. Pretty awful timing, not least with that national insurance rise next week, energy bills soaring from today, even more so, and then of course it's absolutely freezing. But let's just make the case for IPSA there. They've said that MPs haven't had a pay rise for 2 years. It's 2.7%, which matches the average public sector pay increase last year, and according to the chair of IPSA, Richard Lloyd, it's right and it's fair because he says that their work has dramatically increased in the past 12 months. So he thinks they deserve a pay rise. One would argue, in fact, it's actually a pay cut in real terms because it's only 2.7%, which, when you consider inflation is now 7%, it doesn't really do enough. So that's the case that IPSA have made. The PM has said that there should be restraint when it comes to MPs' pay, and Labour's Sir Keir Starmer has said that MPs shouldn't be getting a pay rise increase.
What are they saying about this?
Yeah, well, we had the policing minister, Kit Malthouse, doing the rounds this morning. He's on £115,000 a year because he gets a top-up of around £31,000 for his ministerial job. He said he understands what households are going through, and in fact he also said that it's quite tricky for his household in the current climate with bills, even though he's on £115,000 a year. Some of his cabinet colleagues privately are saying that Rishi Sunak needs to do more. Robert Howe from the Conservative MP has suggested that maybe the government could cut the green tariff on energy bills and also cut VAT on energy bills to try and get them down, at least temporarily. A lot of MPs are saying that Rishi Sunak is going to have to intervene to help people, that the rebate loan that's coming in October isn't enough. Families are struggling now. And then, of course, there's the elections in May. So politically, there is a lot of pressure on Rishi Sunak to do more.
Paul, thank you so much. Well, let's go to my studio guest for today, political commentator and columnist Patrick O'Flynn. I mean, you can accept that there have been unprecedented events which have strangely come together to create this cost of living crisis. But that is, of course, unprecedented for people as well as government. And people look to the government to deal with these things. Are they doing enough? Can they do anything else?
Well, they could do a bit more, but I do think the idea that government has a magic solution to just, a bad set of incidents and conditions happening in the world. The world is poorer, Britain is going to be poorer, the things we need and we like to use are going to cost more. And I don't think any administration could completely wipe that out. I mean, obviously, Keir Starmer is pushing this idea of a windfall tax, which Labour have pushed before. And that's quite easy to say in opposition. It sounds good. He's got a bigger number, I think £600 per household that he says it would help. But you have to worry if you're in government, what's the long-term message you're sending to the energy sector, which you're desperately keen to expand if they think when their profits go up, there's suddenly a new windfall tax creaming some of them away. And they probably think when we're struggling, we don't get a load of state support. So it kind of undermines faith in long-term investment decisions. I think if there's a silver lining, it's that the British economy is still producing lots of jobs. The labour market is quite tight. There's not that much unemployment, and that might mean the capacity for extra hours. I mean, it's not great if people have to do 2 or 3 hours a night overtime in order to earn more income to combat the difference. But that might be a factor, an area where some people can insulate themselves. And I think it's a partnership between government on the one hand, and you can say perhaps Rishi Sunak will do more, but I think every Tory MP seems to have a silver bullet idea that doesn't really amount to that much in the great scheme of things. So it's a partnership with all of us to try and find ways to save money or to generate more income. It's not going to be pleasant. It is going to be grouchy, and it's why Golden Boy Rishi suddenly is now out of touch. Rishi in his £90 sliders, and what car does he drive? And he's going to have to just buckle down and stick to his course as well, I think.
Patrick, thank you. Well, I want to know how the rise in bills is likely to impact you. How worried are you? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. You are with GB News on TV and radio. After the break, we'll be getting tips on how to beat the squeeze. But first, it's time for the weather forecast.
Hello again. It feels cold out there, certainly for the 1st of April. A chilly feel, although the wind's not quite as strong as they were yesterday. Sunny spells for most, and a few showers scattered around as well. But for many, it's dry and fine thanks to high pressure. But the wind's still drifting down from the north, and the isobars are pretty close together still across East Anglia and the southeast. That's where the strongest, coldest winds will continue to blow. And still plenty of showers coming into Kent for the next few hours. But otherwise, mostly dry until we hit the showers coming in for Lincolnshire, parts of Yorkshire, some snow mixed in with those, and snow across the hills and mountains of western Scotland, with some rain heading into Northern Ireland later on. Otherwise, as I said, a lot of dry, bright weather, but it is chilly. Temperatures might squeak up to double digits across the south. Generally, those single figures, and feeling colder with that wind, particularly across the southeastern corner. That wind will ease a little overnight. The showers will tend to ease off across the east as well, but we will see some wet weather drifting southwards across Wales. That'll have some snow mixed in as well, particularly over the hills, but we could see some at lower levels. And with the showers keeping going across the east coast, could again be icy here as we go through the night as temperatures drop widely well below freezing, even in towns and cities. So a cold, frosty start to the weekend. Will be a lot of cloud across Wales, southwest England, with some showers here during the morning. Again, some sleet and snow, even to low levels. A sprinkling of showers then develops through the day over the Midlands and eastern England. Much of Scotland and Northern Ireland dry and bright, and plenty of sunshine elsewhere as well between the showers. But again, it is going to be cold, although the winds will be quite a bit lighter tomorrow, so perhaps it won't feel quite as bitter through Saturday. Heading out on Saturday night, temperatures will drop sharply, so again, be prepared for that. It will be a cold night. Again, it could be a little icy in the east, where we keep 1 or 2 showers. But for many, certainly across England and Wales, Sunday's a dry and a bright day, clouding over across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some rain for western Scotland and Northern Ireland later on.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, P&O Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Well, today, most people in Britain will see energy bills soar by 54%, the biggest increase in living memory. The choice between heating and eating as we're plunged into an unseasonal cold snap couldn't be more stark, while energy giants report record-breaking profits. One Yorkshire food bank is reporting a dramatic rise in the numbers of people using their service. GB News Yorkshire and Humberside reporter Anna Riley has our Beat the Squeeze special report. Meanwhile, new research carried out on behalf of Gingerbread, the national charity for single-parent families, reveals many are concerned about or affected by the cost of living crisis. 95% of single parents have been worried about the rising cost of essentials over the last 12 months, compared with 57% of adults. Over half have seen their financial situation worsen over the past 12 months. 29% of single parents have had to cut back or go without food and meals for themselves. 3/4, that's 76%, fear they will struggle to afford heating or electricity. Well, we're joined now by Victoria Benson, who's the CEO of Gingerbread, a leading national charity working with single-parent families. Victoria, it's an extremely worrying time for many single parents.
Yes, it is. And coupled with those statistics, we're hearing really harrowing stories from single parents about what they're doing already, cutting back on meals themselves, hardly eating. We heard from one single parent that when her children are with their father, she doesn't eat, so that they can't see her not eating, but because she can't afford to. And this is now, we're expecting things to get much, much worse as the year progresses.
As a single parent of 6 yourself, you must be able to empathise with their concerns.
Yes, I mean, I'm lucky because I earn reasonably well, but I've seen my bills shoot up already. My council tax is increased by a huge amount from this month, and my food bills especially, I've noticed that over the last few months. And I can't imagine what it's like for people who don't have any leeway in their budget at all to afford those extra costs.
What would you like to see done to help address these kinds of pressures?
Well, we were really disappointed by the spring statement. The first thing the Chancellor should have done was to ensure that benefits increased at the rate of inflation. And of course they didn't, and they aren't, which means that in real terms, single parents and other people on benefits are losing money right from now. And we would have liked to see more targeted support to low-income families, those people who are really going to struggle over the next few months to afford heating and to afford food for their children.
I mean, it's a shame to say, but we are where we are. The spring budget was what it was. Are there things that families could be doing to really try and cut down on the pressures of mounting bills and the cost of living crisis?
Well, I mean, we're hearing they're doing them already. So we're already hearing that people are doing things like heating one room in their house, the room that their children are in. They're cutting back on all non-essentials. And for many single parents, this isn't about luxuries because we're living pretty close to the bone. So, they don't have much to cut. And we're hearing that people are going without food, as I've mentioned. People are very, very worried about what they're going to do, especially come next winter when they won't be able to afford heating at all. And they're telling us that they're going to resort to debt. We already saw a sharp increase in debt levels during the pandemic. And people, are thinking that they're going to have to take out more debt, and they're thinking about what they're going to stop paying. And for some people, that's their rent or their mortgage. So it's really difficult because it's not about cutting back for them. They will just be not heating their houses and using food banks more frequently.
Yes, a dreadful state of affairs in the UK in 2022. Victoria Benson, CEO of Gingerbread, a charity for single-parent families.
Thank you.
Joining us now is personal finance expert Sue Hayward. Sue, many people are, of course, looking for ways to save money, do anything they can to try and alleviate some of the pressures. What sort of advice do you have for them?
Do you know, it's so hard in the current climate, isn't it? As Victoria was saying, it's such unprecedented times, and a lot of the usual money-saving tips that, I would have come out with, things like turning your heating down by 1 degree and switching suppliers, right now either isn't possible or it's just a drop in the ocean compared to the bills we're facing. But having said that, it's pretty much every penny counts in the current climate. And I would say it is still worth doing things like, the supermarket shop. We all know the prices are shooting up on the shelves. So there's things like a little website, trolley.co.uk, where you can plug in your shopping list and it will work out the cheapest supermarket each week for you, which obviously may vary according to different supermarkets. It can save around a third of your shopping bill. And of course, if you switch brands, you may have a favourite brand of beans or chocolate biscuits, but actually shopping and buying those value brands and the no frills brands can actually save money. It's only pennies usually each time, but it will start to add up week on week. Another thing I would say is, of course, petrol prices. We know pump prices have been going through the roof. There's a really good little website, petrolprices.com, where if you plug in your location where you are, it will actually work out the cheapest petrol in your area, which can save you around 10p a litre, which is about a £5 on the average family car. So once again, a few pennies adds up into pounds, worth doing. It's certainly not going to wipe out the huge increases we're seeing on the energy bills and the council tax bills, but it will start to hopefully in some small way make a difference.
I mean, the problem with thrift, Sue, is that it always seems so miserable, doesn't it? Are there ways that we can potentially adapt as households, but in a way that we can potentially try and make things a bit more fun or try and sort of enjoy being more make, do and mend?
I mean, certainly, for years I've often said, there's lots of fun activities and free things you can do. And certainly, even turning it into a game for looking for voucher codes and trying to haggle. But obviously, for people who are sort of, desperately trying to make ends meet right now, that the whole idea of fun and haggling, may not seem something they'd really entertain. But certainly, I think looking around, certainly if you're buying anything online, when you get to that online checkout and you see that box that says promotion code, always spend just a couple of minutes searching for a voucher code. Very often you can save 10, 15%, and little tricks like leaving your basket at the online checkout. It may sound crazy, but if you just leave it 24 hours before you check out, very often the companies concerned will then send you a discount voucher for sort of 10, 15%, simply because they want to keep your custom. They don't want you to go away and shop somewhere else. So they hope that you will then spend your money there. And also we mentioned council tax earlier. A lot of people, if you are living on your own, maybe if you're disabled or even pensioner claiming pension credit, there are ways to save on council tax with council tax reduction. You've got to speak to your local council about that and they can see what's available.
Yes, Sue, thank you so much. Some top tips there and some life hacks. Fantastic stuff. That's Sue Hayward. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, arrests after protest group Just Stop Oil blocks 10 critical oil facilities. Just what are they playing at? Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thank you, Alex. It's 2:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. We start with some news just in. Formal criminal and civil investigations into P&O Ferries have been launched. That's according to Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng. It's after the company sacked 800 seafarers last month and replaced them with agency workers on cheaper salaries. We'll bring you more updates as we get them. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. It comes ahead of the increase to national insurance as well as other bills. At least 13 people have now been arrested as the group Just Stop Oil continues to hold protests across England. Specialist police officers were called to remove environmental activists blocking oil terminals. The group says around 10 sites have been obstructed by hundreds of protesters. They're calling on the government to stop funding new oil licences. The mayor of Kyiv says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city. Vitaly Klitschko is also warning those wishing to return to the capital to wait. It comes as the UK's Ministry of Defence claims Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. But it says Kyiv and Chernihiv have been subjected to continued missile strikes despite Russian claims of reduced activity. The Red Cross is sending teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow's agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Earlier, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said some progress had been made at peace talks. President Volodymyr Zelensky's office confirmed further negotiations are continuing today. And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today. That is another record number of people in the UK have had COVID. At the end of last week, an estimated 4.9 million people had it, up from 4.3 million the week before, according to the Office for National Statistics. Those considered to be high risk and some NHS and social care staff will still be eligible for free tests. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to We Need to Talk About with Alex in just a moment.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, P.O. Box 999, London, EC3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
How is it that greenies always seem to know how to inflict the most damage on everyday people for their hippy-dippy idealistic causes? So just as the country is already straining under huge fuel prices, environmental activists have targeted a number of oil terminals across the country to moan about the black stuff as it becomes painfully apparent how much we need it to cover up gaping holes in the grid and hold back racing inflation. The group called Just Stop Oil says it blocked 10 sites across the UK, while around 30 people have climbed on top of tankers at the Navigator oil terminal in Thurrock. Essex police say they have made 6 arrests so far. Amelia Harper, our East of England reporter, joins us now from one of the oil terminals that was blocked in Thurrock. Amelia, what's the latest?
Well, Alex, I can give you an update on that figure in terms of the number of arrests. Now, 13 arrests have been made across 3 sites here that have been targeted in Essex. We're here at Askew Farm Lane. Behind me is an oil storage facility that protesters have blocked outside. About 10 minutes down the road, there's also an Esso site that's been blocked today, and Navigator fuel terminal that you mentioned there has also been blocked. This is as a result of the environmental group Just Stop Oil, and what they essentially want in a nutshell from the government is for them to stop funding any future projects to do with oil or fossil fuels. Now, as we can see here, there is an oil tanker. There's some police presence in front here. They're speaking to a protester who looks like a relatively elderly lady standing behind it there. We've also got just to the left as well, you can see a wooden structure, and that is effectively a castle that has been erected, and there are protesters standing inside that, and they have been here since about 4:50 a.m. this morning. And just below that, you may not be able to see, but there is a protester who has chained himself to the bottom of this fuel tanker by the neck, and they are currently waiting for specialist officers to come here to remove him, because it is so tight to his neck that they cannot get any form of power tools nearby. Now, I've spoken to the protesters today. Laura Norton, the spokesperson today, got incredibly emotional speaking about why she was here, worried about the future for her children. And she was explaining some of the lengths that she has gone to and the protesters here have gone to, including wearing incontinence pads and nappies, taking Imodium tablets in order to prevent the need to use the toilet. Now, this is having, of course, an incredibly obstructive, this is incredibly obstructive for drivers. You can possibly see in the background there are cars and lorries coming in and out. And I've spoken to a driver here today, and he says he estimates that around 200 lorries will have not been able to have got in and out. And he says he can't understand why they've targeted this specific location, because this is an oil storage rather than an oil refinery facility. Here there are oil, there is kerosene and petrol and diesel, and he is confused as to why, amongst a fuel crisis, houses may not have received fuel deliveries today from the fuel that is inside this facility behind us here.
Amelia, thank you ever so much for that update. Now, Patrick, I mean, come on, as a full-grown adult, if you're taking Imodium and wearing a nappy to make your point, you're clearly full of...
Yeah, I think this is overwrought middle-class nonsense, and it's this kind of luxury eco thing going on here. My impression is some of these protesters from the various groups are retired public sector professionals who are revisiting their student radical days. But we're in a position here where the government has got to get serious about energy. It's got to get serious about not allowing basic life to be obstructed, and put a legal framework in place, which then requires the police to clear these things instantly and the courts to hand down, real deterrent sentences, financial ones, I think, really big fines. It's really disappointing to see a few dozen protesters able to shut a major oil storage depot like that. It'll have knock-on consequences. And oil doesn't just kind of fuel petrol and cars. It creates so many products that, for instance, the healthcare sector needs to keep people alive. The fact that these, as I say, largely middle-class, overwrought people who've bought into the idea of instant climate catastrophe are allowed to do this in the current economic malaise is unforgivable. And ministers, I think back to Margaret Thatcher, whatever you thought of her in the miners' strike, she had a strategic plan to get the policies that she believed in through, and we need government ministers to step it up.
Patrick, thank you. Now, sticking with fuel, just like that, with a Rasputin-like sleight of hand, Vladimir Putin has played an economic joker card by demanding European countries with big Russian gas bills now pay them in rubles, making a mockery of sanctions by demanding they open Russian bank accounts, something many have refused to do, raising the spectre of energy rationing on the continent, but also causing the ruble to spike to pre-invasion levels. Putinomics have played a major part in his war, with sanctions largely priced in, plunging the West into an energy crisis while threatening to cut off supplies. Something, however, he can ill afford to do, even with a queue of developing nations lining up to buy cut-price Russian gas. Well, joining me now on the show to help us wrap our heads around it all is research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Taras Kuzio, and I'm also joined still by my wonderful studio guest, Patrick O'Flynn. Taras, walk me through this. What is it that Putin is trying to do, and will he be successful?
Well, he's obviously trying to play to his domestic audience that he's, his macho image that, these sanctions, they're no big deal. Look how powerful we are. We'll take on the West. We'll carry on. I mean, remember that he's been doing this anti-Western xenophobia since at least the mid-2000s, so this is nothing new there. But he's playing a very weak card because actually the ball is on the foot of Western countries, particularly European countries, who are going to, whether he likes it or not, quickly or over some period of time, completely eliminate Russian oil and gas from their economies. So Russia's losing out here. I mean, Russia's only outlet for selling its oil and gas is to Europe. It doesn't have pipelines to China, doesn't have oil tankers. So it can't get rid of the oil and gas in the other direction, as it were. And Russian oil and gas exports account for 40 to 50% of Russia's government budget. So literally, if tomorrow all of Europe said, we're no longer taking Russian oil and gas, the Russian economy would collapse. So he's trying to play a tough man, the usual Putin macho image, without, of course, taking his shirt off this time. But he hasn't got a strong hand.
But saying that, hasn't this sort of triggered the fear that countries like Germany, Austria may have to impose some sort of energy rationing? I mean, that's the sort of thing that you wouldn't expect in the 21st century.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen yet. I mean, the pressure is, Germany in particular pushed itself into this problem area, as it were, because it closed down nuclear power stations and got rid of coal as well, and then completely focused on Russian oil and gas, and hence the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was closed because of the sanctions. So Germany has got itself into this pickle. It's under pressure from the West, from countries that don't really import much Russian oil and gas, like Britain and the US, to completely throw out Russian oil and gas. But Germany's saying we need time. I don't think that Germany's going to be rationing it. I mean, we wouldn't want those big German cars going at unlimited speeds on German autobahns, not being able to anymore. I don't think that's going to happen because Russia will continue to sell, despite what Putin's saying. Russia will continue to sell it. Russia hasn't got anywhere else to sell this oil and gas. And if it doesn't sell oil and gas, it's got no money coming into the budget.
Taras, thanks. Now, Patrick, how do you think that this is likely to impact the UK with the ongoing games around gas? We're already seeing a huge spike in energy prices, even though we actually don't import much Russian gas ourselves.
Well, I actually think that this move by Putin may be as much to do with his eventual exit strategy from the disaster of his Ukraine invasion, by putting massive pressure on certain European countries, particularly Germany, which is, a very influential country. So when we do get Russian and Ukrainian negotiators agreeing terms for a peace, that Germany will be leaning on Ukraine and leaning on other EU countries in the West to say, yeah, let's take the deal, let's shake hands on it. Whereas people like Boris Johnson, and as you say, UK, much less dependent on Russian oil and gas, they believe if the war runs on quite a bit, that Russian morale, and we had GCHQ boss talking about this, is so on the floor out in the battlefields that Ukraine can actually be seen to beat the Russian army in the field. So I think it's unlikely that Putin will turn off the taps if Germany, and I think it's unlikely that Germany will end up having to pay in rubles. But I think this is all about psychological pressure. And I do see that it might have an impact, and there'll be a coalition of Western countries pushing Ukraine to agree a kind of a peace which is more advantageous to Putin than we might hope will be achievable if the war runs on and if Ukrainians continue to show appetite for the fight. So I think that's probably what's going on in the background here.
Patrick, thank you. Now, boomers versus millennials, an economic ding-dong that reappears every time a government presents a budget. The widely held belief is that for the Tories, the silver vote wins them elections, so protecting pensioners is the priority, despite the fact that younger generations can't afford to buy houses, have faced gigantic tuition fees, dwindling job prospects on lower wages, and are now being taxed to make up major treasury shortfalls after closing down the economy, essentially to protect the elderly from COVID. One thing is true, the wealth gap has exponentially grown, with those born into families with assets able to buy assets themselves, and those without inheritance often locked out of home ownership and saddled with massive debts for their education. But not all pensioners are rich, and not all youngsters live on lentils. So how has the cost of living crisis affected the generational divide? Well, joining me now is the founder and CEO of Switch Up and Nottingham School of Boxing, Marcellus Baz, and Dennis Reed, who's the director of Silver Voices, which is a group that advocates for pensioners. Now, Marcellus, you work with young people in a very deprived area of the city. How is the squeeze impacting them?
It's seriously impacting the people that we're working with. We work with, like you says, a lot of young people and their families that are from deprived areas of the city. And it's impacting them to the point where people are having to make decisions of whether they heat or whether they eat. It's a very serious issue that is continually getting worse and putting people in a very, very difficult predicament.
And Dennis, I'm going to come to you. People often say, well, it's OK for pensioners. Their pensions are protected. They lived in an age where they could buy homes, where they had their education based on grant systems rather than paying tuition fees. But it's really not that simple, is it?
Well, no, it isn't that simple. And I don't recognise that there is a generation's war in the current cost of living crisis at all. Because pensioners certainly are feeling abandoned at the moment by the Chancellor. All the emphasis from politicians across the parties has been on support for working families. Now, I'm not denying that working families need support, but so do older people as well. And that is our main concern. The recent Chancellor's package gave nothing at all to older people, and our state pension is going up only 3.1% at a time when inflation is aiming towards 10%. And that is a huge cut in living standards for millions of pensioners.
I mean, at the end of the day, Dennis, it seems to me that if you're, not very well off, this is going to hurt you a lot more than if you're very well off. And that sort of cuts through all the generational divides. What sort of things would you like to see the government doing to really help those pensioners who don't have huge pensions, who don't live in, maybe don't even own homes and certainly don't live in very expensive ones?
Yes, the picture of all people with silver hair going off on cruises every year is, I'm afraid, a distortion of reality, because there are millions of pensioners who just about survive on the state pension, possibly together with some modest savings and a small occupational pension. Now, those people are being really hammered by the cost of living crisis. Just to give you one illustration, the cap is going up, as we all know, £700 on average today. That is 5 weeks of the total state pension of somebody who depends on the state pension. 5 whole weeks just to cope with the increase in the cap, let alone the energy and fuel prices themselves. So really, we've got to address the very low level of our state pension compared to the rest of the developed world. We are way down the list, at the bottom of the list of rich nations for what we provide in the state pension. And that's why there are so many older people who are fearing the worst in terms of their poverty over the coming months.
Dennis, thank you ever so much. Marcellus, I did want to come back to you, but I'm afraid I've run out of time. But let's catch up on this again in the very near future. Well, that's about it for now. Join me again next week for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock on Monday. Coming up next, of course, it's The Briefing with Arlene Phillips. First, though, it's time... Arlene Foster, that is. First of all, it's time for the weather forecast.
Hello again. It feels cold out there, certainly for the 1st of April. A chilly feel, although the wind's not quite as strong as they were yesterday. Sunny spells for most, and a few showers scattered around as well. But for many, it's dry and fine thanks to high pressure. But the wind's still drifting down from the north, and the isobars are pretty close together still across East Anglia and the southeast. That's where the strongest, coldest winds will continue to blow. And still plenty of showers coming into Kent for the next few hours. But otherwise, mostly dry until we hit the showers coming in for Lincolnshire, parts of Yorkshire, some snow mixed in with those, and snow across the hills and mountains of western Scotland, with some rain heading into Northern Ireland later on. Otherwise, as I said, a lot of dry, bright weather, but it is chilly. Temperatures might squeak up to double digits across the south. Generally, those single figures and feeling colder with that wind, particularly across the southeastern corner. That wind will ease a little overnight. The showers will tend to ease off across the east as well, but we will see some wet weather drifting southwards across Wales. That'll have some snow mixed in as well, particularly over the hills, but we could see some at lower levels. And with the showers keeping going across the east coast, could again be icy here as we go through the night, as temperatures drop widely well below freezing, even in towns and cities. So a cold, frosty start to the weekend. Will be a lot of cloud across Wales, southwest England, with some showers here during the morning. Again, some sleet and snow, even to low levels. A sprinkling of showers then develops through the day over the Midlands and eastern England. Much of Scotland and Northern Ireland dry and bright, and plenty of sunshine elsewhere as well between the showers. But again, it is going to be cold, although the winds will be quite a bit lighter tomorrow, so perhaps it won't feel quite as bitter through Saturday. Heading out on Saturday night, temperatures will drop sharply, so again, be prepared for that. It will be a cold night. Again, it could be a little icy in the east, where we keep 1 or 2 showers. But for many, certainly across England and Wales, Sunday's a dry and a bright day, clouding over across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some rain for western Scotland and Northern Ireland later on.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, P&O Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.